Good evening, everyone, again. I would like to shortly present Tengyur Rinpoche for those of you who haven't been here last time. Tengyur Rinpoche is born in Mount Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh in India. He is the sixth among 10 siblings. He has a very big family. At the age of 9, Tengyur Rinpoche joined Seraje Monastic University for Buddhist studies. A year after that, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama visited Gyume College in South India, he recognized Rinpoche as a reincarnated Lama, as one of the former abbots of Tawang Monastery, which is one of the biggest monasteries, Buddhist monasteries in Arunachal Pradesh. It's located there. Then many of you might not know, but monks in Seraje also complete regular secondary education. So Rinpoche finished secondary school with distinction. He has done 20 years of monastic education, and now he's doing Yeshe Larampa studies, which takes 6 years. It is the highest degree possible within Tibetan Buddhism. Besides that, he studied Tibetan and English and participated in many conferences on science. Also, Rinpoche served as an English interpreter for His Holiness the Dalai Lama on a few occasions where thousands of people came to the teachings from around the world. And then in 2014, he established his own organization, a non-profit that is called Tibetan Chedrubling Foundation in Arunachal Pradesh that aims at spreading Dharma and also teaching the local people different kinds of skills, life skills. And last year, when Rinpoche visited Yeshe Norbu in November, he became also a registered FBMT teacher. So we are very privileged to have such a learned scholar here teaching us today. And the topic of today's teaching is how to see yourself as you really are. So, thank you, Rinpoche.
Okay, my greetings to all of you, and I wanted to thank Yeshe Norbu Center for having me here to be part of the Buddhism in Nutshell course, and it's really an honor for me to be participating and sharing some of my thoughts with all of you. And so this is a very a kind of interactive discussion I want it to be, and I don't want it to be very serious discussion. So when Zarina presented, it looks like a little bit of serious. So I want everyone to relax. And so let's hope that the next 1.5 or 2 hours, I hope it will be a good interactive session with all of you. And I look forward to that. And similar to the last session, so after I complete the first session, I will take some questions from all of you, and then maybe we will continue once again. So my initial plan is to talk more on the generation of shamatha, the karma abiding meditation, and then if there is time, a little bit on emptiness, and finally end of the session with sharing some of the tips about how to do a daily practice for all of us together. So depending about the time, so let's see how it comes. And so once again, I'm really very happy to be here and to continuing with what we discussed before. In the last session, we talked about the 3 principal aspects of the path. And of course, it was about generation of renunciation, and how important the renunciation is. It's all about thinking about how precious your human life is, and in what ways we have to make it meaningful and benefit for other, to be of maximum benefit of for the other people. So we touched about those points in our last session. And then we also briefly talked about generation of awakening mind, the bodhicitta mind, the great compassions for the benefit, the wish to liberate all the sentient beings from suffering, Then the third one, which is the most important, is about the wisdom realizing emptiness, or the reality of nature, which we will be discussing today. So first, I wanted to start with how important the calm abiding meditation is in our life, in day-to-day life, in whatever we do. So when we speak about calm abiding meditation, in this session, I wanted to incorporate a little bit about sources related to different Buddhist scriptures. And when we talk about the generation of great compassion and the bodhicitta in our previous sessions, I wanted to remind you that as a person who trains in the highest path of benefiting, bringing maximum benefit to other people, their trainings or the practice mainly revolves around the training on 6 perfections, that what we called. And the 6 perfections, the practice of generosity and maintaining a good ethical discipline, and practice being patient, and also making joyous effort towards all the virtues or any kind of activities that you do. And the 5th one, which is the perfection of concentration. And the 6th one is wisdom. So today, the first 4 are generally easy to understand, and but the 5th and the 6th one, that's where we are going to touch today. And so when we look at these 6 perfections, the way they are laid out, the order itself has a very important message there. So the first, the concentration comes, and after that, the wisdom comes. So the concentration here is actually about the shamatha meditation. In Sanskrit, we call it shamatha and vipassana. In English, it's usually translated as calm abiding meditation and special insight. So we will discuss more on what they actually mean. So the order, why the calm abiding meditation has to be the number 5 in the 6 perfection, and then later the special insight or the wisdom has to come after that. So that order itself becomes very important. So it clearly, the order itself tells us that in order to realize emptiness, it is very important to first develop a very single-pointed meditation, a very super level of concentration in our practice, in our mind. So that tells us this important message. So when we speak about concentrations or shamatha meditations, it's all about concentrations that we do in our day-to-day life. And in every professions in this world, be it a student or someone works in a company or any centers or all walks of life, whatever we do in our lives, different levels of concentrations we use in our life to achieve our purpose, whether it's a small project, whether it's a big project or whatever. So the level of concentrations that we have actually brings a very important results and effect to the outcome of your projects, outcome of your work or meditations or whatever. For example, it is a very common thing nowadays that 10 minutes, for example, 30 minutes single pointed concentrations to read a book, for example, or to read, if you're reading something, and if you single pointedly out of full concentrations, if you read the book for 30 minutes, so the number of pages that you cover doesn't really count, but whatever you read, so when you read it with full concentrations on one hand, and on the other hand, when you do multitasking, so that's what we do all the time nowadays. You have your mobile phone on one side, and you're talking to somebody else, you're looking there, and you're also reading it. So when you do multitasking, so this is multitasking is a modern term for actually distracted activities. And so the result is different. So with multitasking, when you even spend 1 hour reading a book through also engaging in many other activities, the result is different. So you won't be able to catch anything out of it. So that is something that we all can experience. And so here, I wanted to tell you about some very small, what should I say, tips that we as some young monks, we taught in our monastery when we first joined the monastery. So I think that will be something new for you. So for example, in my case, when I first came to the monastery, I realized that the first thing that our teachers teaches us is about to sharpen our speech, because the monk's life requires a lot of memorizations and debate and speakings. And so to sharpen our speech, and actually we call it to make our tongues thin. So every morning and before going to bed, we have to recite Manjushri's mantra. So Manjushri's mantra, we have to recite one full mala, Omara Bhajanadi, Omara Bhajanadi, Omara Bhajanadi, in this, and that the sound has to come very clearly. And that very technique actually really, what should I say, brings a great change to how you speak and how you spell the words when you read something, when you speak. And so the other people can catch what you're trying to say much more clearly. And now I realized that how important it was. And in some way, reciting the Manjushri mantra, I'm not talking here about the faith or the belief or the karma that you accumulate out of doing that. I'm only speaking about the merely doing the action, what immediate result you get it. For example, in our monastery also, we have also students who have difficulty in speech. We have difficulty to say things, stammers and those things also. And merely reciting Manjushri's mantra every day actually helps overcome that also. So this is a small thing. And another thing we were told is, right after we did the Manjushri's mantra, we have to start memorizing our text. So every morning you have to memorize. In my case, I have to memorize three verses, which is about 12 lines. And it's very tough, it's very tough. You have to memorize it, and you have to go to your teachers at some point in about 1 hour, and then you have to give a test every morning. Otherwise, you will get punished. And so at that time, sometimes you only get 30 minutes to memorize the 12 lines. Sometimes you get 40 minutes. So you have to use that very limited time in a full potential way to memorize the 12 lines. And I've personally found that the best way to do it successfully is by fully concentrated on what you are doing. So without thinking about anything else. And so our teachers tell us not to sit facing the roads or facing the windows, because if you if you memorize facing the windows, you see people going there, here, and a lot of activities, and that distracts you. So we have to face walls, and that may sound a bit strange for some of you, but that small kind of tips, actually really helps us to do the memorization much faster and much clearer. So this is a personal experience that I had, that whatever we do in our life, in my case, even memorizing some lines with pure concentrations really brings the result much faster. And also, what should I say, the quality is also there. So that the reason why I'm saying is that tells us that it is so important in our daily life to practice single-pointed meditations. So single-pointed meditation, how we have to train in doing that. So generally speaking, for someone who really wants to study in the path of the Dharma, and especially wanted to stay in retreats or do some special retreats and practices. So in traditional way, those practitioners, those who are in the path of practitioners, were advised to first develop the karma abiding meditation, first develop the single-pointed meditation. So the thing is that once you develop your single pointed concentrations, once you are able to gain it, so after that, whatever you do, you are able to do it in a much faster way compared to the other people. And you are also able to, what should I say, grasp or withhold the informations or whatever memorizations, whatever readings or practices that you do, you can do it in a more meaningful way. So that's why they were always advised to first meditate on shamatha to develop your single pointed meditations. So in ancient times, when people first meditate on single pointed meditations, when they first do it, a lot of external conditions also play a very important role about how your meditation becomes fruitful, how it becomes successful. So they laid out roughly about 6 guidelines about how, at the beginning, how you have to do it when you try to improve your concentrations. The first thing is dwelling in a very favorable place. So in the sutras, Lord Buddha says that you shouldn't meditate in the crossroads. You shouldn't meditate in a public place. You shouldn't meditate at a doorstep. You shouldn't meditate on a staircase. So these are the few important points that Lord Buddha has said. And the reason is that at a crossroads, in a highways, for example, or on a staircase, or on a steps, or just at the entrance, a lot of people will be going out and coming in. And so the location or the place itself actually harms your attentions. So when a lot of people comes and you have to talk with them, and so that harms you. So therefore you have to find a very isolated place, a kind of a retreat, a place where you can do your practice and retreat in a calm way. So that is one thing. That's why if you read the ancient stories, the histories of the development of Buddhism and other traditions in Southeast, especially in Asia, so especially in the case of India, so the great yogis all go to the Himalayan mountains for meditating. And if you read the Milarepa's stories, he chose very important caves to meditate. That's the story is same with Lama Tsongkhapa. So they choose very important caves, the locations for their meditation. So these all have a very important role to play in how it improves your concentration level, the place itself. And of course, maybe many of you might know about Mount Kailash, which Manasavar and the Mount Kailash, which is said to be the abode of Lord Shiva, is actually one of the best place for doing meditations. So what this tells us is that in today's time, we may not have that opportunity. We may not have that luxury to choose such a place. So many of you lives in metropolitan cities and high-rise apartments and facing highways and so on. So just by location, there are a lot of, what should I say, unfavorable conditions are there. But there are ways how you can make your meditation place in such a way that it doesn't really, it favors, what should I say, a calm and a steady place. So whatever place you are in for doing your meditation, we have to make use in such a way that it doesn't favor your distractions. Second thing is having less desire. One of the main antidotes, one of the main distractions that harms the quality of our concentration is because we get distracted. We easily get distracted by many things in our life. And one reason is that because we have, what should I say, a lot of desire towards many things that we need in our life, need versus want. And so those desires make us do more. And so that actually causes, what should I say, decrease the concentration level of your mind, single point, and it harms. Because the desire, the single pointed meditations and those concentrations actually, what should I say, decrease the attachments, decrease our desires towards the worldly things, especially the objects, the sensorial objects. And so that's why it's important to be try as much as having less desire and being content with what you have. So these are the important practices. But when we say being content with what we have, it really doesn't mean that we have to just live in a very, what should I say, aesthetic way or not. But whatever things that we have in our life, the only thing we can be happy with it is when we are, what should I say, content with what you have. So that is actually called being content. And I wanted to tell here a metaphor, an instance in the Milarepa's life story where he says that, so some of you might have heard Milarepa's story, and he only have a pot, an earthen pot to make food, and usually he make the, what do you call it, the vegetable soups all the time. And so sometimes for us, even for me as a monk, and we too have, we feel that we know that we have to be content with certain things in our life so as to lessen our desires. But just to be content or satisfied with what you have, first you have listed, you have a long list. I need this. And when I have all this, then I want to be content. So your contentment is actually quite, the list of your contentment is actually quite long. So that is not really what it is meant by being content with what you have. In case of Milarepa, he only has one that earthen pot, and one day it broke. And the Milarepa said that I only have one pot, and that pot also shows its impermanent nature today, and it says that it no longer wants to be with me, and that's all he said. He says that's the end of my relation with that pot. So that tells us a very important message, is that if you feel that you at least need one pot all the time, then when that pot breaks, Milarepa has to look for another pot. But that's not what he did. So these are, really a high level of content practice, but there is some important message that we can take from it. And then next is, the next one is about giving up unnecessary activities. So that actually distracts your concentration. Unnecessary activities is, I think, I don't know about you, maybe it's not in your case, but in our case, and in many of my friends' case, we spend a lot of time doing gossip things, just talking about really, what should I say, unmeaningful things, and wasting your time. And so that takes a lot of your time and a lot of your energy. And so if you try to really look into your life, you look into your personal life from your own eyes, directed towards your own activities, you will find that you're actually doing many things that are actually not really meant for you, that actually doesn't have any meaning in your life. You're actually doing so many things, what should I say, that is not a part of your life, or you do not have to do it. So what we call the extra things. So if we try to make a list of what you do every day or every week, and then if you try to delete some of that and started doing other things, that makes your life more meaningful, and actually that will buy more time for you. So you can free some of your times from doing unnecessary things. So in today's world, we all need time to do meditations. We all need time to do something for personal things, personal developments, mental developments. We don't get time to do it. Maybe the coronavirus gave all of us some time to do it. I don't know in your Sweden case, because your situation is very good there. But in India's case, especially in our monastery here, during this lockdown for last 2 months, it actually gave us a lot of time to do some practice that you have been doing. I just came to know from some of my friends here in the monastery, though I haven't met them for last 2 months. They said that some of them are in retreats of some particular deities. Some of them are doing prostrations retreat, and some of them are doing some renovation at their house, and they all say that this actually lockdown gave them the opportunity to do things that they have always wished to do it. They've always longed to do it, but then we are not able to find the time to do it. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to make time for things to do in our life that really matters for our personal development. So this is very important when it comes to shamatha meditations. And the next is about maintaining a pure ethical discipline. So maintaining ethical discipline is all about, what should I say, for one's own personal development. We all know that in day-to-day life, we have to abide by some kind of discipline, whether it's a food habit, whether it's exercise or a work cultures or anything. Some sort of discipline is very necessary in our day-to-day life. So for a country's development, for a society's development, we need a lot of laws and the rules. Similarly, in our own personal development, there are some ethical precepts and the disciplines, very fundamental ones that is necessary for all of us. For example, to abide by not to engage in non-virtuous actions as much as possible, and try to engage in positive actions, and being mindful of your three doors, being mindful of your speech, being mindful of your thought. And last time I shared with you the Tibetan saying that when you are with a group, be mindful of your speech and take care of your tongue. And when you are alone, watch your thought. So these are the Tibetan proverbs that really makes a lot of sense in one's own practice. So because when we try to look into our own activities, and when we started to judge our own activities and be responsible for it, then the personal development happens. So that is the time when we started to see where the things are going wrong within ourselves, where the things are going right, and what you have to do to make things better. So that's the number 5 one, which is very important, I feel. And the next is, of course, the gathering rid of all the unwanted thoughts that actually continuously circles in your mind and so on. And one thing is, one of the main, what should I say, the obstacles for generation of the single-pointed concentration in the text, I found today in the Lamrim Chemo, in the by Lama Tsongkhapa, that excessive socializing. So excessive socializing has been found as one of the source or the main obstacles for developing concentrations. So I found that's really very important message, because now as a social animal, of course, we do not have the habit to live, to stay alone. We are always in the need of a company to survive in a society, in a community. That is our human nature. As a social animal, we have to socialize. But when you, what should I say, when you engage in excessive socializing, unnecessary socializing, so that actually creates a more condition for you to be distracted over and over again and straying away from your concentrations. And also, what should I say, unrealistic lifestyles that we may have. So these are some of the preconditions that are listed in the text. I think some of them may not make, what should I say, may not be very relevant to today's times, or maybe for some of you, all of those points may not be relevant, but I think some points will be definitely very relevant for all of us in our practice. So once we have such a conditions in our day-to-day life, because to generate that kind of concentrations, it won't come in one day, and it won't come in 1 week, or it won't come in 1 month. It will take years to increase your concentration levels and increase your meditation. So it will take some time. So you have to be always, what should I say, you shouldn't expect the results too soon, and we have to learn to learn to know that the results will take a long time. So therefore, these changes has to happen in your daily life, in every day, so that the concentrations will increase. So then when you started to meditate on single pointed concentrations, so how you do it on your day-to-day life. For example, every morning, if you sit for 10 minutes or 15 minutes meditations. So the first thing is preparations. So before you sit down for your meditations, you have to do a set of preparations. In the text, they says, the first, of course, you have to clean your place. I mean, this is very common sense. I think we don't have to discuss here. But in the text, in the Buddhist text, usually they say that when you engage in meditations, most of the time it's related to some daily yoga practices, and you're inviting all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and other beings into your own residence. So you wanted to make sure that your place, the place where you meditate, is actually very tidy and very clean. So it's all about arranging a little bit here and there and make it a little bit more, what should I say, to change the setting a little bit. And this may sound not so important, but when you do a real retreats, for example, when you stay for some kind of special retreats or 3 years great retreats, one point that we always maintain is that you have to always make sure that the place where you sleep is different from place where you meditate. So you shouldn't meditating on your bed. So as much as possible, you have to avoid that. So when you sit on your bed, I don't know about your case. In my case, when you get up in the morning, when I get up in the morning, so and when I try to do some meditations or do some memorizations or anything, when I sit on my own bed, I started to feel sleepy automatically, because my bed is actually designed for my sleeping. So that's why naturally it comes, so your mind also thinks that's the place where you're going to sleep or you rest. So therefore it's always more sense, more also practical to have sitting for your meditation separate from where you sleep, if there is the possibility and if the condition favors. And then if you are a Buddhist and if you are into a certain kind of practices, of course, this is the time when you have to lay it out your offerings. So offerings in the right way, and making water bowl offerings and whatever the offerings that you do. And then you sit down in a good postures. And usually we speak about the 7 postures, the lotus postures. But I said before, I think I shared with you all also that it depends on your different cultures. In Indian and Tibetan culture, we have the traditions of sitting cross-legs, but I think in some Western countries, you do not have that culture. So whatever the postures that you are comfortable with, you have to sit in that postures. But the main point is that your sitting style shouldn't be favoring distractions or feeling, what should I say, sinking or sleepy. Sometimes if you're leaning back too much, so then you may feel sleepy. And if your back is lower than the front, then you may get sleep. So there are a few tips, practical tips that we all have to be sure that we do not get distracted. For example, in our day-to-day life, most of the distractions that happens to all of us is through our ears and through our eyes. When you see things, when you hear things. So therefore, lowering your visions and try not to listen to all the noises and try to find a calm place. So these are the main reasons for saying that. So then when you sit down for this single pointed meditation, So the first thing is, so your physical body is in the right conditions, in the right postures. So now is the time to look at your mental things, because it's something like, as long as your physical body and its parts are not settled down, you won't be able to even look at your mental things. So for the mental thoughts to be clear and for you to be conscious of what's actually going on in your brain and in your mind, it's so important that first we have to settle down physically. So physically, you have to be comfortably settled down. And I always make this a very important point, that when you are physically settled down, at least spend 2 to 3 minutes doing a completely blank meditations. So blank meditations here, what I meant is, do not think about anything. Let everything settle down. It's something like you have black tea and you just stir it very hard. So now you want the teas and everything to settle down a little bit so if you keep it for some minutes, it will settle down, right? So you can see the clear part at the top. So once that happens, then we have to start looking at our inner things. So that is the time that when we will be able to notice what's actually going in our mind and our thoughts. So the first thing is, in single pointed, in a way to generate the single pointed meditation, is one important point that we have to remember here is that when we speak about meditations or means to develop single pointed concentrations, so when you are trying to concentrate, of course, there has to be an object. There has to be something that you have to concentrate upon. So it's always a big mistake thinking that just getting rid of every thoughts from your mind is actually the single pointed meditation. That's a big mistake that many of us does. And I wanted to also tell the story here that in Tibet in 7th and 8th centuries, when the Buddhism first came to Tibet, and so there was a huge debate about understanding meditations. And at that time, the Hashangs from the Chinese traditions, the Hashang traditions believe that meditation shouldn't be involved with any conceptual thoughts. So they believe that you have to stop all the thoughts from coming into your mind. You have to actually purse your thinkings and delete all the thoughts and make sure that they do not ever come into your mind for that moment. So if you're able to maintain such a state, and they consider that as a pure meditations. And so this was the big misconceptions. And for that, so the great Shantarakshita and his student Kamalashila, they were the great masters of Nalanda, and they were invited to Tibet in the 7th and late 8th centuries to dispel that misconceptions. And that's where the Shantarakshita and composed the stages of meditations, which is a wonderful text. I think that you all should read it, and many of you might have read it. And there is 3 levels of that text, stages of meditations. And that is actually the first text written in Tibet by any Indian masters in 7th century. And so in this text, Shantarakshita tells that is when your mind is blank, you're not concentrating on anything. So when you concentrate on anything, you need an object. You need something to focus your mind to. So that's why when you're in the highest form of meditations, your investigative nature of your mind, the wisdom nature of your mind, the discernment capacity of your mind has to function at its peak level. It has to function. It has to work at its peak level. So if it is not functioning, then actually you're sleeping, or you are actually falling into what we call the sinking thoughts or laxity. So that was a huge debate, and so Shantarakshita's contribution to Tibet is enormous in the development of this meditation. So that's the first step we always suggest to all the people is, if you are a Buddhist and if you're comfortable with visualizing Lord Buddha's statue in front of you, then visualize a Buddha statue in front of you. But this is only for the beginners. But if you are doing any certain practice or any kind of meditations, so that object could be anything. That object could be a compassion. That object could be loving kindness. That object could be awakening mind. That object could be impermanence nature of things. So it can be anything. So the thing is that when you look at the statue of Lord Buddha, for instance, here in front of your, which is around a safe distance from your body, from your forehead. So the object that you have to visualize in your mind is actually not a physical object, it's a mental object. So when I say mental object, is that you should be able to visualize that object clearly even when you close your eyes. So if it is a physical object, then you cannot see it when your eyes are closed. So when I say mental objects, so you have first look at the things physically with your open eyes, and then visualize the same nature of that object in your mind. And so train your mind in such a way that and then you can you can analyze yourself how steady you can maintain that clarity of that objects, for how long you can maintain. To most of us, you cannot maintain the clarity of that object for long. It will go away in 1 or 2 minutes or a few things. So that's the first thing. So then when you are, this is actually the studying for developing of the shamatha meditation, what we call 9 mental placements. So I don't think that you don't have to really account about the 9 mental placements and those things, but I will only tell about the important aspects of those mental placements. And then when your concentration deviates from its focus, then you have to bring it back into actions once again, and then you focus once again, and you will realize that at the next attempt, it will stay a little bit longer, and your focus will be much clearer than the initial level. So in this way, gradually, it will continue to improve from the first attempt towards the second attempt and more sorts. Now, there are a few things that we have to be mindful when you sit on such meditation. So first thing is, there are some preparations that you have to do, which things that we have discussed before. For example, if you are meditating on compassion, so thinking about all the sufferings that are going on currently in this world due to the coronavirus, the people who died and people who are convicted with the case, and also those peoples in the countries like Africa and India, millions and millions of people lost their jobs, and they don't have a place to sleep. They don't have a place to eat, and they walk for weeks and weeks to reach their hometowns. So this is really the right time to think about all the sufferings that are going on in this world and meditate on compassion. And so, for example, if you are meditating on this compassion at this moment, the first thing is we have to make sure that at the time of meditations, before you started meditation, you don't forget about compassion. So when you meditate on compassion, what you have to know something about compassion, how compassion arises, when compassion arises, what you have to do, what you have to think. So these are the instructions. So you have to be mindful of the instructions and make sure that you apply them in order. So you have to remember the instructions clearly at the outset of your meditation. That is number one thing. So if you forget the instructions, so then at that time you have to apply the antidote, which is the recollections or the memory, to bring it back again at the time of meditations. So the reason this becomes important is that sometimes when you started to sit down for meditations and you realize that you're not able to remember anything. So you feel discouraged, you feel tired, thinking that I planned so much and I could not achieve anything. So that's why you lose hope sometimes. So that is the time when you have to use the capacity or the power of our recollection memory to bring back, to recollect in your mind about the compassions and what you have taught before. So this is important. And here I wanted to tell you about the importance of recollections. So recollections in Tibetan, we call it Dempa. So recollection is very important in all these practices. It says that we remember when you first listen to something or study something, and then, for example, today you learned about how to practice patience when you started to get angry. And then, of course, as a human nature, we tend to forget it when the circumstances comes, so it doesn't stick to your mind. So you end up not being patient, so you forget it. So what recollection does is that recollection is actually the thing that comes in between of all these things and try to remind you that you have did this yesterday, you have studied that yesterday. And so this is the time you have to apply it. So recollection's duty is to remind you all the time that you have to be mindful of this. The example is when you, in our hometown, I think in Europe also you do the same thing. When you cut a huge log of wood, so when you hit the axe, and first you make the line to cut the wood. So when you first hit the axe, so that's your target. So you hit it on the right spot. So, but then when you're ready to hit for the second time, it may go another line, so that's not what you wanted. So what you do is you put a ledge. I think in English it's called ledge. I don't know the terms. There's a small metal pointed where you put inside to make sure that you do not lose the line. So then next you hit at the right spot, and then you put one more ledger. And so in this way, you're able to achieve your goal of cutting the big log into one piece, fine line. So similarly, the memory or the recollection's duty is to always come into place and reminds you whenever you deviate or whenever you forget some things from your instructions. And then, of course, at the time of your practice, becoming lazy. Personally, this is one of my main weakness, to be lazy. And then when I study, I came to realize that the laziness that is described in the text is actually much more than in the conventional world what we meant by lazy. So in the conventional world, of course, when we speak about laziness, you just do not feel like doing something. You say, I feel tired. I do not feel there is no energy in me. And so that's what we call lazy. Of course, that is one kind of laziness. But in the text, they said that if you are, engrossed in some non-virtuous activities all the time, and due to those, non-virtuous activities that deprives you of doing the things that you want, that is also a kind of laziness, because that actually harms, takes away the opportunity from you. And one thing is, which is the habit that I have, is procrastinations. So things that you could do today, you say, oh, maybe I can do it tomorrow, or I will do it day after tomorrow. So in this way, you make it later and later, you procrastinate. So laziness pertaining to procrastination. So that is also one common laziness that we all have. So at the time of meditation, when laziness started to come, you have to be again mindful that sometimes initially you plan to meditate for 30 minutes, but then as soon as you sit down to meditate for 10 minutes, you feel you're tired, and within you at that time you will realize that there is two self, and one self is actually telling you, okay, today you can just stop your meditation at 10 minutes. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. So that's where the laziness is actually ordering you to stop your meditations. So at that time, we have to be mindful and bring into the role of the effort or the joyous effort. So joyous effort, which is the antidote, has to come into place and make you go more and make you achieve your target. So these are the ways that we have to do while doing the meditation. And then the next two is the laxity and excitement, which is really, really the main obstacles that we all face. Sorry. When you started to meditate and when you feel that everything is okay, then you feel sleepy. Or when I have some friends who say that, is it okay to keep your eyes open? I asked why. They say, as soon as you started to close your eyes, you feel sleepy. So this is the real sleep that they are describing, and that is true. So that is called laxity, and that excitement is actually about straying your mind from your actual focus. When you sit down in this way, actually a lot of thoughts that will come up, and we have a friend, again a teacher here, who says that he goes to the market very occasionally, maybe once a week, and so to buy small stuffs that he need for his kitchen and for his house. So the small things like nails or screws or some brushes or small things, he tend to forget. And so when he's already at the market, he don't remember, oh, I need something, I have to buy something today. I don't remember. So then he says every morning when he sit down to do his prayers and meditations, and as soon as he sit down, so those thoughts are started coming. So those thoughts coming, oh, I need to do something at my bathroom. So my bathroom is leaking. So then as soon as that thought arises, he take a pen and make a list. So what he's trying to say is that when that happens, when you're actually sit into the meditative postures, all these unwanted thoughts started coming in. So as I told you, when your physical becomes well rested, so then all the thoughts started coming in. That's what we call the distractions. And then next is when there are no distractions, of course, you feel the sinking nature, which is a feeling of low self-esteem or feeling sleepy. And so when this too happens, at that time, we have to apply the antidote of introspections and try to make sure that, try to tell yourself that these are the actual obstacles, and you stop those thoughts from coming back to your mind and try to refocus your mind to the original, what should I say, your focus. So these are the actual antidotes and the obstacles that comes at the time of meditation. And one point that I wanted to tell all of you is that in the text, it is written that it is very difficult to differentiate between the very subtle form of laxity, so very, very subtle form of sinking thoughts with the pure meditations. In India, for many centuries, many scholars were actually mistook that low laxity feeling to be a pure meditations. When you feel that you're really doing a good meditations sometimes, but actually you're actually meditating on that laxity, that sinking nature. I think this is a little bit difficult to understand sometimes, but we have to make sure that we are not under one of these obstacles. And so I wanted to have a look at the time. Okay, and and here I wanted to tell these measures, this means to develop shamatha meditation. Actually, this comes from all the different scriptures and different scriptures. Especially, I found a very beautiful expression that beautiful teaching on shamatha meditation's generation in Vinaya text. And in the Vinaya text, in ancient times, the great yogis, so when you go to isolated for retreats and doing meditations, and sometimes you have to meditate yourself. There is no people, there is no companions, and so you're alone doing the meditations. So in the text, it's written some very funny instances and some very funny techniques to make sure to, what should I say, to stay focused towards your concentration. One thing is they tie a bucket in front of you and tie a string in such a way and put it on your ears and make sure that if you sleep, then you may so turn your head or turn your head on one side, and at that time the bucket of water will fall on your head and it will awake you. So there are these very interesting techniques that are used by these great yogis, so very childish things. Sometimes we may look at them as very, what should I say, very stupid things, and sometimes, but those are part of the great practices that they do. And one story I saw in the text is that when the teacher is meditating, when the master teacher is meditating, the student has to actually, and from time to time, come and watch from the door to make sure that his teacher is actually meditating. And so when he found teacher sleeping, then he has to gently find ways to awake him. So, I mean, these teachings are actually very beautiful, which actually ultimately tells us that we have to find all sources and methods to keep ourselves focused on our meditations. And so as we keep on doing the similar practices on day to day, and as we discussed last time, so meditation and those things has to be a part of our life, has to be a part of our practice. And the general meditation doesn't have anything to do with religions or practice. So it can be done by anyone, but the meditation that we are discussing here is something different, something much more than just staying, what should I say, staying retreat or just staying silently and in one corner with certain postures may not be the pure meditations. So therefore, in our day-to-day life, the best way to gain some results, because if you do not get results, then you feel sometimes you feel you don't feel the energy to do it. You don't feel the determination to do it because you don't see any results. So the best way to make sure that you see some results is to make meditation a habit, a part of your life that you do every day. And so you have to find time for that. And one thing that I personally realized over the years is that if something is important for you, then you will always find time for it. So that is definitely true, because for many years I have seen people complaining about time, that I don't have time to do this, I don't have time to do that and that, But I've also seen some people who could do so many things and who could do really great things in so many things. And then the ultimate thing is that if you really care and if you really feel that is something that you want, then time shouldn't be an excuse. So we all have time. So how busy you may be, but you will always find time to do meditation. And for example, we may be very busy, but we always find time to eat our meals, because we know that if we do not eat your meals, we may die. So the eating meals, we have really consider it as the most priority, because if you do not do that, you will die. So similarly, if you make the meditations something's very near to that priority levels, then you will end up doing that every day. And then when you do it every day, for example, when you do on day 1 and day 2, so if you just keep on doing the same thing again and again without, what should I say, giving some feedback to yourself, or without really looking at any changes or any, what should I say, things that are happening that you want, then it won't be much benefit. So therefore, when you do a meditation for day 1 and day 2, on the day 2's morning, you have to first spend a few moments to do, what should I say, to analyze about what you did yesterday, and what mistakes that you made, and how you will avoid doing those mistakes, or things that you did yesterday, you rejoice and you want to do it again. So in this way, if you make a meditation a part of your life, so then you will improve. Then you will definitely find that in 1 or 2 weeks, your concentration level improves, your attention level improves, and so you will be a more calmer person. So the only way that we can achieve is to make it a part of our daily life. So from the day 1, our concentrations may not be that strong, but it actually tells us that concentration is something that you can cultivate, that you can grow further. And it can go so far, it can go till that far, that one day you will attain a state where you will be able to stay focused, single-pointedly focused on your object or whatever it, for as long as you want, without any distractions. That is the point where when you actually gain the shamatha meditations, the full form of shamatha meditations, when you generate it. But we have that capacity within us. All of us do have that capacity. And so when you started to see the improvement, so what should I say, the goal is not that far. So that is how we have to do, I think. And that's why the shamatha meditation is very important. So the shamatha meditation, again, I wanted to remind you that why the concentration is the 5th perfections and the wisdom is the 6th. Is shamatha meditation is again a technique for any kind of practice. So in order to achieve anything, you need to use this technique initially. That is something that you have to do at the initial levels. And once you have a good concentration levels, then whatever practice you do, if you are a Buddhist, if you are doing some tantra practices, if you are doing some any kind of practices, or deity yoga or sutra practices. So shamatha meditation is very important for all of us to gain some results, to see some transformations within us. Otherwise, it will be like, what should I say, like what we discussed. Sun rises every morning and sets every evening, and then it rises tomorrow morning. So there is nothing new about that. So if your meditations or daily prayers becomes something like that, there's not much essence or not much reason for that. Maybe some people say, oh, I feel happy when I do some prayers. Some people say, I feel very calm when I do meditation. If that is the only purpose, then it's fine. But that's not the real purpose of doing meditation. So one need to work on building some personal transformations. So once we have the foundations of these calm abiding meditations, based on that, then we actually analyzed. We are at a very good locations in our body and in our mind, where we are able to look at our thoughts, what's happening in our mind. So when you suffer, when you feel happy, what are the things actually happens in your mind? When you suffer, when you face problems, when you feel stressed, what are the actually things that happens in your mind? So if your single pointed concentration is very strong, then you will be in a position to look inwards towards these thoughts. And then you can control them. You will find means to, you'll be able to apply the antidotes. So that's why this is very important. And I think in the next part, we will talk a little bit about emptiness and our daily practices. I think it's all. So I think I will stop here for a while and take questions, if there is any questions. Okay, Zarina, can we open up for questions and answers?
Yes, Rinpoche. Thank you very much for this profound teachings on concentration. So, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can raise your hand in the chat, or just maybe unmute yourself and ask the question, because it might take time if we follow the procedure. Hannah, the participant of the course, has a question here. Maybe would you like to come a little bit closer, or just take this? I'll bring it to you.
Yes, hello. I was wondering, when you know that someone, a human or an animal, is going to die, how can you make that as easy as possible for them, and to be, can I do something for them to be reborn at a better place?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for the questions. And I think so. When you see some animals, for example, your pets dying, there may be few reasons for that. I mean, if they're having a natural death and having lived their whole life, and one thing that we have to, of course, when someone is very dear to us, so it is difficult for us to let go of them. That is basic human nature. It's a basic sentient nature of what I should be saying. But one thing that we have to remember, this very powerful message, is that the ant of birth is dying. The ant of what should I say, gathering is dispersed. So this teaching is from the Kadamba masters, very strong teachings, and that will really help us move forward in our life. So when we they say that when you gathered, so the nature of gathered is something that after that you have to disperse and go to your own places, and that is, if that is nature, we have to accept it. And then of course when you are born, so the end of being born is to die. And so that is natural for every one of us, be it animals or humans, or even your dear ones, or even yourself. But that is a part of our life. Death is also a part of our life. So when we are able to accept that, so it is much, much easier for us to let go of them. Of course, it is difficult. But what you can do is, from a Buddhist point of view, is, of course, the best thing that we can do is usually speaking, is that makes more benefit, is the things that you do when they are alive is much 10 or 1,000 times more beneficial than what you can do, what you do at the time of dying or when they are already passed away. So always we have to remember that it's not like when someone dies and when someone is at deathbed, then you do something and that really becomes something great. Of course, there are a lot of things that you can do, but if you do things that benefits them, that helps them, that makes them happy while they are alive, that is the most important thing. But now in this case, if it is your pet or animals about to die, if I have to speak from Buddhist point of view, you can do dedication for them, dedication for your pet who is dying. And you can say prayers for that animals and to be reborn in better rebirths. So those are the things that you can do. And in some what should I say, part of Tibet and in Himalayan regions, we offer sacred waters to these animals and also tie their neck with some precious threads. But these are very, what should I say, culture-oriented practices these Himalayan peoples do about the faith that they have towards the cultures and the faith that they have. So that's what I wanted to share. But the main thing that you can do is that you do prayers for the dog or any kind of animals, and you do dedication. So that will definitely help that animals in its future life. Thank you. Sorry.
Is there anyone on online who would like to ask a question? Anybody here? You don't seem to have questions, Rinpoche. Everything is clear.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So if there are no questions, shall we move to the next topic? So we don't have much time. So
yes, and also I think we are looking forward to the teachings on the internet.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move to the next topic, which is actually the sixth perfection. That is the perfection of wisdom. And I think in the last session we talked about, in the last session, I mean, in just before, we discussed about the generation of shamatha meditations. And I hope that I didn't went into too extensive details to bore you. So, but anyway, so the emptiness, when we say the emptiness or the perfection of wisdom, the first thing that it comes to my mind is how difficult it is. So sometimes it really discourages you because it's so difficult to understand for someone who spent so many years in a monastery trying to understand it and still could not make any sense. But whatever the small amount of understanding that I have, so I wanted to share with all of you. And as I said before, definitely there is a reason why the wisdom has been kept at the last, and the five perfections preceding that. One way to look at it is that the wisdom is the ultimate goal. So ultimately, we wanted to generate the wisdom that understands emptiness. Because once you understand emptiness, it is the actual sword that will cut through the ignorance, and that will free us from suffering, that will bring us closer to liberation and enlightenment. So therefore, the first five parts, we can call them as the skillful means development, or what should I say, preliminary practices, or preliminary practices that are necessary to lay out the groundwork for generation of wisdom realizing emptiness. So in one way to look at the emptiness in a very understandable way is coming back to the main topic about understanding self as a person. And in the last session, I think we discussed that in this world, the self is the most important person. And just a few weeks ago, I saw a picture on some news difference between how we perceive the world and the reality in itself. So when we look at the world, we always put ourselves in the center, the most important being, and rest of the beings surrounding us. And then, but the reality is that we are just one of the billions of humans in this world, and not just think about the animals. So that's a reality. So the reason why I'm saying this here is that self is so important for all of us. Of course, that without self, there is no person, there is no identity. So whether you agree or not, self plays so much role in shaping the world in general, the individual in particular. So that's why understanding what is self is the root of understanding all the problems and all the happiness in this world. So therefore, the same thing, the same what should I say, technique is used by Lord Buddha. So after enlightened Lord Buddha enlightened. So in the first teaching that the Lord Buddha gave in the Four Noble Truths, so Lord Buddha taught about the truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, and the truth of cessations and the path to cessations. And when it came to the path to cessations, what are the paths that we can practice? Lord Buddha taught about the eightfold paths. But the actual teaching that he gave at that time was the teaching on emptiness that he taught. So understanding self in a much more clearer way. So now step back and we will all try to look at our own self and understand what really the self is, when the person that you consider so important in your life. So who this person is and where does this person actually resides. So if my name is Tenzin, so whatever name that you have in your mind, you call upon your name. And where is this Tenzin actually in my body? Where is it? Is it in the head? Is it in the body? So this is the way that we have to analyze ourselves and try to find ourselves. So before Lord Buddha came to this world, there are many other non-Buddhist great traditions like Samkhya traditions, and also traditions like Jainisms and Mimamsas, and many great Indian philosophy schools of thoughts. So they all have different versions of explaining about self. And their explaining of the self is also very beautiful, something that we have to know. And then Lord Buddha, when he came, he refutes all those explanations and came up with the fresh explanations. So in some way, we can say that the main purpose why Lord Buddha came to this world is try to prove them wrong and try to tell us the real identity of self. That was his main goal, to come to this world. And so now let's look at how these early non-Buddhist schools thought about the self. It's actually very similar to how we as an individual perceive ourselves. For example, think about yourself in this life since our birth and now, few decades. If you are 30 years old, 3 decades have already passed. So in my case, so then from the first year you were born and the first day you were born, you may now not be so much conscious about things. You may not remember clearly the first day that you were born, but definitely after 1 year or 2 years, you will start to recollect memories, right? We all will recollect memories, what we did when we were kids, when we were young. And we do realize that over these years, a lot of changes happened to our physical body. So when we were baby, we were only this much. And then now, so you have a different body. And so you realize that our physical aggregate, the body, changes over the years. It ages. And that is the fact of human life. But within our thought, there is a constant feeling that yourself still remains the same, that you are Tenzin 30 years before, you're Tenzin when you go to school, you're Tenzin when you went to university, you're still Tenzin when you do this job, and today you're in these discussions and you're still Tenzin. So we tend to have that permanent grasping or feeling that the self, which is the Tenzin here in my case, remains the same all over these years. So therefore, many of these non-Buddhist schools thought that self is in reality permanent. It doesn't change. Self doesn't change over the years. Only our body changes. So self do not changes, but our body changes. So that is one misconception that we have. And the second thing is the way we look at ourselves is that we always consider self as employer and our physical body as its employee or an object that it uses. So the self as someone who controls the things and our physical body as an object that it controls. So there's a relationship between employer and the employee, or the controller and the object that it controls. So these are two different entities, two completely different entities which are not related to each other. So similarly, we know that we can make sense, we can even analyze and find that self is a part of our body, but still in our heart of heart, we tend to think that it is something different from your physical body. It has its own independent identity. So that is the reason why that is the reason why in many theistic religions, in Christianity and theistic religions, the concept of the soul is very strong, because when one dies away, the soul departs from the body and it goes to heaven and so on. So that concept is very similar to what the earlier non-Buddhist schools think about the self as an permanent, as I described before, and singular, and interdependent, not independent. Independent in the sense that it doesn't depend on its aggregates or the body for its identities. So that was the way we, even yourself, if you think closer, that really looks very clearly. I mean, that really makes some sense, that identity of the self. But then go back and we will try to discuss about the first point, the self as a permanent thing. We know that all the years, for last 30 years, a lot of changes have happened to you and happened to me. By the nature of the law of the causality, it says that the changes that comes in one decade has to come, at least the changes that happens in a decade has to happen in all of those 10 years. I'm sure you all will agree. So it's not like you have the same physical body for last 10 years and all of a sudden you become old or you become aged. That's not the case. So in the last session, we discussed that when we talk about 12 interdependent links, the first moment that we are born in this world and the next moment onwards, we are taking a step closer to our death, and we are aging. And this is not very beautiful. Some of my teachers, my teacher used to tell us that he really don't feel comfortable telling the Western students, especially. He goes to Italy to teach. And so he used to say that he felt very uncomfortable teaching, especially some Western students, not all, about this fact about the 12 interdependent link, where it says that the next moment onwards, you start aging. And the next moment onwards, you're inching towards your death. And death is sometimes acceptable, but a young baby, which is not yet 1 week old, if you say that it's getting aged day by day, you know, that's not really convincing or not really a thing that we all want to hear, but that is a fact. And so what I'm trying to say here is that the changes that comes in our lifetime, actually a part of that changes has come over the years. And the changes that comes in a year has to come in a month, and month in days, and days in hours, and hours in minutes. So if you break in this way, so every minute, every second in our life, changes are happening, though we are not conscious of that. But it happens all the time. So therefore, the same thing happens with self. So therefore, self cannot be permanent. So Lord Buddha proved them wrong. You're wrong. And then when you say self is independent and doesn't rely on aggregates, so how can you pinpoint, how can you, what should I say, find the self within you? Sometimes we may say our physical body is the self. Then where is your physical body? So that is the way that in the Buddhist school, they apply logic reasonings to, what should I say, to find the reality, to, what should I say, extensive analysis to try to find the reality. So when your body parts are taken one at a time, your hand is not you, your legs are not you, your head is not you. So it's so difficult to find the self. Sometimes when when our teacher teaches us about the self in this way, the first moment, it's frightening sometimes. It's really frightening. Where is my self? You cannot find it. So whether you always find it's somewhere here or somewhere here, you know. So when you look in this way, it's difficult to find it. So therefore, it proves that self do not have an independent identity. It has to be understood in relation to our physical body. Its identity has to be in relation to our physical body. So this is what Lord Buddha taught, that to understand the self. And so, so when you analyze and try to find the self in this way, it is so difficult to pinpoint or find a solid nature of the self. So therefore, Lord Buddha summarized by saying that though self exists, but it doesn't exist as we thought, as we perceived. And so he taught about the theory of, or what should I say, the philosophy of no self, anatman, contrary to what the earlier Buddhists said. And to understood this level of self-reality is actually called understanding of emptiness pertaining to self. And now I wanted to tell you about some ground realities, why the Lord Buddha has to teach about emptiness, why emptiness becomes so important. Can we just ignore it? What will happen if we just ignore it, if it is not that important? And I think that a lot of problems, we can see all the problems that we face in our life and all the happiness that we have in our life. All the problems that we face in our life is because we do not understand the reality. Because our perceptions of the reality is not the actual reality. So there is a huge gap in the actual reality and our perception of that. So therefore, you thought something different, but the reality was something different. There is a huge gap. So Lord Buddha says that due to this gap of understanding the reality, so we all suffer. So therefore, understanding emptiness was so important. And emptiness again tells us that it actually tells us a very special way of understanding, very special, what should I say, existence of the things. So everything exists in this world, in our life, in a way which is in relation to how we look at it. That a larger part of it is actually made by our own thoughts, but not the reality. For example, let's discuss about these 2 points. The first about the mental exaggerations pertaining to attachment and anger. Anger and attachment is a part and parcel of our life, and in some way, that is the biggest gift of our life that this human life has given us. So sometimes through attachment, we are able to do a lot of things that we want in our life. And through anger, we are able to defend things. So these two mental delusions or qualities, we can say in some way, have been a part of our life for so long. But now let's step back and have a clearer look about how these two in reality functions. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says that nowadays even science proves that the objective reality and the way that these delusions look at that object, there is a huge gap. So these are two disparities that we could not understand. When you first feel attached towards someone or something, so before the attachment arises in our mind, before this thought attachment arises in our mind, one mental thought actually precedes that attachment, which is called mental exaggerations. So what that thought actually does is that thought actually looks at that object or that person's and maximize its beauty, maximize its identity, its attractiveness. We say the attractive or the beauty of that object is a certain level, but that mental exaggerations which precedes our attachment actually increases it by manifolds. And that's why we get attached to that object or that person. So that's not reality, but reality was something different, and attachment's purview or of its own reality is something different. So there is a gap between these two realities. So therefore, when you're under this kind of saturated attachment, a lot of problems comes in our life. Similarly, it's the same case with anger. So when you look at the anger, the famous psychiatrist Aaron Beck, which His Holiness often quotes, says that 90% of the image of the other persons to whom you get anger is mental exaggerated. So absence of all the exaggerated nature of that person, understanding that is actually understanding emptiness. So emptiness teaching actually tells us to understand the reality of any object, the reality of any situations. Whatever the situations you face with reality, try to understand its nature, its reality. Do not go after the exaggerated mentations, exaggerated thoughts. That is another view of that objects, which make us suffer further. So this is about, this is a very summarized and a simple, what should I say, a presentation about emptiness as being looked from the Buddhist point of view. And I can say that when the emptiness of the self, when the identifications of the self and emptiness comes, not only the Buddhists and the non-Buddhists disagree about identity of the self and the nature of the things, even different philosophical tenets within the Buddhist schools came up in early, even during Lord Buddha's time and after Lord Buddha's time, many different schools and many different great masters explain things differently. For example, the lower schools could not agree that things do not have any absolute reality. So lower schools still feels that there is some reality in the objects. One example that I can give you is, nowadays we have this fake snake, do you call it? Fake, the plastic snakes that we used to frighten some people, you just throw it and they feel that it's a real snake and they get frightened. So the fake snake and a real snake, you have two objects. But if you labeled the term or the name snake to the fake snake, and if you label or give the name snake to the real snake, though they both look similar, but the label only works on the real snake. but doesn't work on the fake snake. So why is it like that? So they say that in order to label something, there has to be some ground reality. The fake snake do not have any realities from its own sources to be a snake, but the real snake has all the qualities, the ground realities to be the snake. So therefore, when you label it as a snake, it is suitable for that. And but the higher understanding of emptiness, I think that this discussion, my main intention is to just give a brief introduction about emptiness, because I do not want to confuse all of you. I hope that in future we may have another 1 or 2 class on this, because it's not good to pile every information at one go, because it may confuse you more. But I wanted to tell a very important point that maybe some of you may not have exposure to these kind of analogies. So for example, the thing that I have in my hand is a pen, and it is labeled as a pen. The pen is the name of this object. So if I ask you, so let's look at this from a debate point of view, ask each of you, so the name of this object, the pen, and the object itself with the cap, the nib, and the body, and so which came first, whether the object, these things, or the name label? So you all have to give me. So that's what I am trying to ask all of you. And the thing is that, you know, the thing is that when you I don't know who coined the name, the pen, for this object. Somebody might have coined this term for the first time. So the object, of course, comes first, and the name comes later, right? So, for example, if we have at that time called this object apple, so today we might be referring this as apple. I have a dark apple and something, you know. So it's all in our mind. The label that we give to an object, that the object finds its ultimate reality. So these objects do not have its own, what should I say, solid identity, except for what we wanted to call that object. So just wanted to share this analogy with all of you. So I think that in future we can bring this as a source of debate, and so that I can gradually lead all of you to the intricacies and the beauty of Tibetan debate coded. So it's very beautiful to understand emptiness. And one of the best way to understand emptiness and this difficult explanations coming from text through debate and healthy debate, I mean. And so with this, I wanted to end about the emptiness today, so won't go much detail, and we also don't have much time left. Some questions. I will take some questions, and later I will use another 5 minutes to speak a little bit about daily practice. Thank you. Zarina, we can take some questions.
Thank you, Yeshe. May I ask a question? In one of the books, His Holiness the Dalai Lama writes that ignorance is an active misapprehension of reality. So I was puzzled about the word active. In what way is it active, this misapprehension or misconception or misknowing of reality?
Mm-hmm. I think we can look at it from a few ways. Ignorance seems to be the primary source of all the problems, all the negative emotions that we have. So ignorance can be The Tibetan term for ignorance is marikpa. So marikpa means not understanding the reality. Okay, so there are two levels of that misunderstanding, that not understand misconceptions or ignorance. One is not just knowing the reality. If you don't know certain things, just not knowing a thing by itself is not a big mistake. It won't harm you a lot. For example, if you don't know a way to go to some place, so you only lack the wisdom knowing that things, but that won't bring you any harm. But the real ignorance that we are talking here is that kind of thought which considers things, which look at things different from its reality. For example, things do not have permanent nature. Our life is not permanent, but the thoughts that look at our life as permanent and unchanging. So that is one ignorance that we are talking about here. Things do not have solid or absolute reality from their own side. They are in relation to the mind or the people that looks and observe them. But the thought or the mind that when we look at the things having absolute reality, so that kind of thinking by itself is ignorance. So these ignorance have a very strong capacity to guide us or to lead us to many wrong ways. So therefore, based on this kind of ignorance, attachment arises. Based on this kind of ignorance, anger arises, and also ego arises, and all these problems arises. Therefore, I think it is called active, and the fundamental, the root of all the afflicted emotions. I think that's all, Zarina.
Thank you, Richard.
Any other questions?
Any questions here?
Yeah, I can ask a question, please. When you talk of emptiness and this example of the pen, I was thinking, because I have to translate the Buddhist way of thinking of it into a Western or existential philosophical way. So would you say that it's the same? We have the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who was talking about that existence comes first and then essence. I mean, here's an object, and that object is an object, and then we label that object into something. And in the next question then, that is the kind of emptiness is when we start to deconstruct this object, what it actually is or is not. Are you following my thought? I try to understand, so I translate what you're saying into my my schooler.
Okay, thank you. So these two questions are really wonderful, and I think also difficult to answer. The first thing is, as the French philosopher says, some sections of Buddhist schools agree with what you said. The object comes first, and then we label it. So there is what should I say, difference in understanding. I mean, first the object is there, then the label. So when you say that the label comes next, we are actually talking about a particular label, that you call it a pen or a pot or a flower or whatever, but the object itself exists first and you give a name later. It's similar to a baby was born and then you give a name to the baby. So if we look at things from that perspective, that is absolutely correct what you said. But things and any when the baby is born, whether you label, give a name or not, it do have its own existence. And so when things do have its own existence, so there has to be an observer that observes that things. There has to be a mind that look at that thing. So it's not like things always, it's not like the label comes next and things to have to exist first. So when things exist from the moment, that moment itself, they are, what should I say, in the purview of another mind or something. So this is another way to look at things, because the highest Madhyamika philosophy says that because there are things, there are the people or the mind that look at that things. Because there are minds that look at that things, the things that exist. So the existence of an object and the observer are in relation to each other. So the observer exists because the object exists, and the object exists because the observer exists. So this may sound a little bit tricky, but it's very beautifully said, and I think that that may make some sense to you if you look at from this point of view. And so therefore we don't need another way to establish an object. So if a flower is there, there is an observer for the flower because the flower exists. And in this way, I wanted to raise the questions to all of you, is that according to Buddhist philosophy, it says that all the particles and all the things in this world, in this universe, there is an observer that observes that things. So what do you think? For example, in our text, we have metaphors that we find some lives of animals within huge rocks. They're huge rocks. So in the center of those rocks, somehow lives form and such objects. So can there be any objects that no one has observed till now? So these debates, I think we can discuss more. My internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Sometimes.
Okay, yeah. So, okay. So the next thing is about understanding emptiness. Your second question is about understanding emptiness. I think when you reconstruct the phenomena, things, when you reconstruct, that is only the analogy, that is only the logic reasoning that you use to prove the reality of an object. But understanding of the emptiness may not be limited to that. So understanding of the emptiness can be much more than that. So when you deconstruct things, so that is the way that you prove that things do not have reality nature, that you can understand or you can see it when they are reconstructed. So I won't say that that is the way, that is the only way to understand emptiness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have one more questions?
One last question,
Yeah, if there is any.
Maybe from someone online. You can just unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yes, Rinpoche, it's Robin in New York. And I have a question. My understanding is that there's emptiness of self and there's emptiness of phenomena. Why is it that it's said that emptiness of self should be gained first, the realization of emptiness of self should be gained first, and then emptiness of phenomena comes, or should be second in order?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question, Robin. This is really very philosophical questions, and actually there are a few ways to look at that. Many philosophers say that the order is actually not certain, that you could understand the emptiness of emptiness pertaining to a self and emptiness pertaining to a phenomena at the same time. And so there are many different views, but the common or the major view is what you said. And I think the one reason is that the emptiness itself, the nature of the things itself, is same whether it is for a person or it is for a phenomena. Phenomena here means objects which are different from, which are not persons, like a table, a pen, a book. So most prominently our physical body. So when you meditate on emptiness of yourself and the emptiness upon your physical body, so it is easier for you to understand the emptiness on yourself first compared to your body, because as a human we are more attached towards ourselves than our body. Though we are attached to our body, but our attachment towards self and body, if you compare these two, you are more attached to yourself, and so therefore you're more familiar. Your familiarization is more towards yourself than your body. So if there are two objects, one which you are not so familiar with, and there's another object which you are very familiar with, so of course always choose the object which you are more familiar to use as a base for understanding anything. So that is the same case with the self and the phenomena, that since you are more attached and familiar to your own self, that's why you meditate on the self, emptiness on self first, and then you use the same analogy, same rational and reason to meditate on objects later. So that's why when you lose your attachment to yourself, it is very easy to just use the same logic on other things, like all the belongings and your possessions. When you don't feel too much attached to self, you won't feel attached to your possessions and belongings. So I think that must be the reason. So anyway, thank you so much for the questions. And
Thank you, Rinpoche.
are we, thank you so much. So Zarina, are we at the end now, the summary?
Yes, Rinpoche, you wanted to offer something there?
Okay, I think we're almost, the time is up. So I will just use 1 more minute. And so first I wanted to say thank you to Yeshe Norbu Center for giving me this opportunity to part of the Buddhism in a nutshell. And I hope that whatever the discussions that we did in the last 2 sessions may become a source for you to explore more and study further. And I was asked to speak a little bit about the daily practice, how one can incorporate everything into one's own practice. And I think that it depends upon who you are. And if you are a Buddhist, and if you are practicing some special deity yogas or any kind of prayers that you have, so depending upon different individuals, there could be different practices. One thing to summarize, I wanted to say is that any kind of practice that you do in a day-to-day life is to make your day more meaningful, and ultimately to make your whole life more meaningful. So therefore, 2 important practices, that is in the beginning and at the end. So that is in the morning and before going to bed. So in the morning when you get up, so the first thing is we have to thank everyone for making your life possible. And also it is the time to shape your motivations and intention to start the day ahead. And it is always better to set your motivation to a compassionate motivations. Though the turn of the day, at the events of the day turns out, there may be things that you may have to do something, what should I say, non-compassionate approaches and those things. But those things are the needs of your job or your responsibility. But in the morning, when you spend few minutes meditations, if you shift your motivations very positively, it will have a good effect on your mental health being, and that will actually also help your physical well-being for the whole day. So you will feel, when you get up and when you started to do something, you will feel energized, you will feel inspired, and so you will feel empowered to do things. So that's very important. And before going to bed, if you spend a few minutes in your bed or before sleeping to recall what you did for the day, try correct mistakes then, and also rejoice in what you do. I think these two practices are very simple that you all can incorporate in your daily day-to-day life. I think that's very important. So apart from that, there's nothing else that I have to say here, and it has been a great time to be with all of you, and I wish all of you good evening, and also stay safe and stay healthy, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yeshe, for this wonderful teachings. And we are looking to a continuation of, looking forward to the continuation of teachings on emptiness, if we may.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. Have a nice evening.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.